Success looks beautiful on the surface. Crisp suits, perfectly curated Instagram feeds, airport checkies, smiling selfies with captions about grind mode and blessed. From the outside, it appears effortless, like some people have cracked a secret code and are now living in a permanent highlight reel. But what we rarely talk about is the hidden cost of looking successful. Not actually being successful. Not building something meaningful. Just looking successful. There's a difference. Somewhere along the way, success stopped being about fulfillment and started being about optics. It became a performance, a brand, a carefully managed illusion designed to signal to the world that we are ahead, thriving, winning, and the pressure to maintain that illusion is heavier than most people realize. Let's start with the most obvious cost. Money. Looking successful is expensive. The car lease, the designer clothes, the luxury apartment in the right neighborhood, the dinners at trendy restaurants, the watch that quietly communicates status without saying a word. Many people stretch themselves thin financially to afford these symbols. They take on debt they can't comfortably manage. They say yes to expenses that don't align with their actual income, all because appearances have become currency. The irony is brutal. In trying to look wealthy, people often trap themselves in financial fragility. They can't leave a job they hate because the lifestyle depends on it. They can't take a risk on a new venture because the bills are too high. They can't slow down because the image must be maintained. What looks like freedom from the outside is often a cage on the inside. And the cost isn't just financial. It's psychological. When you're committed to looking successful, you become hyper-aware of how you're perceived. Every post, every conversation, every purchase becomes strategic. You're no longer simply living your life. You're curating Italiano. You begin to filter your reality through the lens of how will this look, rather than how does this feel. That constant self-monitoring is exhausting. You start avoiding situations that might expose struggle. You hesitate to admit mistakes. You downplay confusion. You hide doubt. Because doubt doesn't fit the image. Struggle doesn't fit the brand. You tell yourself you'll be honest later once you've made it. But later never comes, because the performance only intensifies. Then there's the social cost. When you build your identity around looking successful, your relationships subtly change. Some people approach you because of what you seem to have. Others keep their distance because they assume you're doing better than them. Conversations become surface level. Vulnerability feels dangerous. If people see behind the curtain, will they respect you less? You may find yourself surrounded by admiration but starved of authenticity. Compliments replace connection. Applause replaces understanding. And in quiet moments, when the phone is face down and the room is silent, the loneliness creeps in. There's also the cost to ambition itself. When looking successful becomes the goal, actual growth often slows down. Energy that could be invested in skill building, creativity, or experimentation gets diverted into image management. You prioritize optics over mastery. You choose projects that sound impressive over ones that stretch you. You network for visibility rather than learning. You stop asking, what would make me better? And start asking, what would make me look better? The difference is subtle but profound. Real success is usually messy. It involves failure, iteration, humility. It requires long periods of being unseen. It demands patience. But when you're addicted to the appearance of success, you avoid those messy stages. You don't want to look like a beginner. You don't want to be caught learning. So you stay in safe territory, competent, polished, stagnant. Another hidden cost is comparison. When your focus is on appearance, you inevitably measure yourself against other appearances. You scroll through feeds filled with exotic vacations, new ventures, milestone announcements. Everyone seems to be moving faster, achieving more, living bigger. But you're comparing your behind-the-scenes reality to someone else's highlight reel. And because you know how much effort goes into maintaining your own image, you assume others are doing it effortlessly. That assumption quietly erodes your self-esteem. You start thinking, if I'm struggling this much to look successful, and they're doing even more, they must be extraordinary. What you don't see is that many of them are struggling just as much, perhaps even more, to maintain their own illusion. Then there's the cost to identity. When you perform success long enough, you start to forget who you are without it. The clothes, the titles, the lifestyle become intertwined with your sense of self. If you were to lose them, who would you be? If the business failed, if the income dropped, if the spotlight moved on, what would remain? That fear can keep you clinging to roles that no longer fit. You might continue down a career path you've outgrown because it looks impressive. You might stay in circles that drain you because they validate your image. You might silence parts of yourself that don't align with your brand. Over time, the gap between your public persona and your private reality widens. And living in that gap requires constant emotional labor. There's also the cost of delayed fulfillment. When you prioritize looking successful, you often postpone the things that actually matter. You tell yourself rest later. You'll reconnect with family later. You'll pursue your true interests later, once the image is secure. But maintaining the image becomes a full-time job. The later keeps getting pushed further away. You might wake up one day with the external markers of success and realize you're disconnected from the very reasons you started. And then there's burnout. Performing success demands consistency. You can't suddenly disappear. You can't suddenly downgrade your lifestyle without questions. You can't openly express exhaustion without disrupting the narrative. So you push through fatigue. You smile through stress. You post through pressure. Your nervous system never fully relaxes because you're always on. Even rest becomes content. Even vacations become proof. There's no off switch when your identity is tied to perception. The body keeps the score. Chronic stress shows up in sleep problems, irritability, anxiety, even physical illness. But admitting that feels like weakness. So you keep going, because stopping might crack the image. One of the most subtle costs is the erosion of intrinsic motivation. At the beginning of any journey, there's usually curiosity, passion, a genuine desire to build, to create, to contribute. But once external validation becomes the primary driver, that internal spark can fade. You start chasing applause rather than excellence. You measure progress by likes, followers, promotions, and visible milestones. When the applause slows down, and it always does, motivation drops with it. Because you are fueled by recognition, not meaning. This creates a dangerous cycle. To regain attention, you amplify the image. Bigger announcements, louder achievements, more dramatic displays. The stakes keep rising, the performance gets more intense, and the cost increases. Let's talk about the cost to honesty. Looking successful often requires selective storytelling. You highlight wins. You gloss over losses. You frame setbacks as lessons before you've even processed them. You package pain into inspirational quotes. While there's nothing wrong with optimism, constantly reframing reality to protect your image can disconnect you from your genuine emotions. You stop fully feeling disappointment because you're too busy branding it. You don't allow yourself to sit with confusion because you need to project clarity. Emotional suppression has consequences. Unprocessed feelings don't disappear. They resurface in unexpected ways. Irritability, resentment, numbness. And because your public image is so positive, you may feel ashamed of these darker emotions, so you hide them even more. There's also a cultural dimension to this. We live in a time where visibility is power. Platforms reward polish. Algorithms amplify extremes. The line between personal life and public life has blurred. Even ordinary professionals feel pressured to build a personal brand. Success isn't just about doing good work anymore, it's about being seen doing it. In this environment, it's easy to conflate exposure with achievement, to mistake attention for impact, to assume that if something isn't visible, it doesn't count. But some of the most meaningful progress happens quietly. The hours spent practicing, the mistakes made in private, the slow accumulation of skill. These things rarely go viral. They're not glamorous, but they're real. When you prioritize looking successful, you may skip these quiet stages or rush through them. You may announce plans before they're solid. You may share goals before you've built the discipline to achieve them. And when reality doesn't match the announcement, you feel pressure to force it. That pressure can lead to poor decisions. Overpromising, overextending, cutting corners, all to avoid the embarrassment of not living up to the image. Another hidden cost is authenticity fatigue. When you're constantly curating your life, you begin to lose track of what's spontaneous and what's strategic. You might hesitate before sharing a genuine opinion because it doesn't align with your brand. You might dress a certain way not because you like it, but because it signals status. You might pursue hobbies that photograph well rather than ones that fulfill you. Over time, you become a character in your own story, and maintaining a character is tiring. Let's consider the long-term impact. If you spend years optimizing for appearance, you may build a life that looks impressive but feels hollow. You may achieve milestones that earn admiration but not satisfaction. You may reach a point where stepping off the treadmill feels impossible because too many people are watching. The higher the pedestal, the greater the fear of falling. That fear can make you risk-averse. You might avoid bold moves that could genuinely elevate your life because they come with the possibility of visible failure. You protect your image at the expense of growth. But here's the paradox. Real success often requires visible failure. It requires moments where you don't look polished. Where you admit you don't know. Where you start over. If your priority is looking successful, you may never allow yourself those moments. And without them, your potential remains partially untapped. There's also the relational impact within families. If children grow up watching adults prioritize appearance over authenticity, they internalize that lesson. They learn that image matters more than integrity. That struggle should be hidden. That vulnerability is weakness. The cycle continues. Breaking that cycle requires courage. It requires someone to say, "This isn't sustainable. This isn't honest." So, what's the alternative? It's not about rejecting ambition. It's not about avoiding visibility. It's about realigning priorities. Instead of asking, "How can I look successful?" ask, "What would make me genuinely fulfilled?" Instead of curating every step, allow room for imperfection. Instead of inflating your lifestyle to match an image, build a foundation that gives you freedom. True success often looks boring from the outside. It might mean living below your means, investing quietly, practicing consistently, saying no to opportunities that don't align, admitting when you're wrong, taking breaks without broadcasting them. It might mean fewer people clapping, but more people truly knowing you. And perhaps the greatest hidden cost of looking successful is the opportunity cost. Every dollar spent on status is a dollar not invested in freedom. Every hour spent curating is an hour not spent creating. Every decision made for optics is a decision not made for growth. Over time, those trade-offs compound. But here's the hopeful part. Awareness changes everything. The moment you recognize the performance, you gain the power to step back. You can choose to simplify, to be honest about where you are, to redefine success on your own terms. You might lose some admiration. Some people may drift away when the shine fades, but the ones who remain will be connected to you, not your image. And in the quiet space left behind, you may rediscover parts of yourself that were buried under the performance, curiosity, joy, peace. Because at the end of the day, success that must constantly be displayed is fragile. Success that is rooted in skill, character, and alignment is resilient. Looking successful can win you attention, but being successful in a way that feels sustainable and true wins you freedom. And freedom, unlike image, doesn't require an audience.